conducted an interview, and I could not be accompanied by a better person to reintroduce myself back to the interview scene than Father George Fleming. Him and I go way back. He was the priest at St. Bonaventure's. It'll always be St. Bonaventure's to me. It's now Transfiguration Parish. He was there until 2011, until he relocated to a church in Chatham, St. James, right? That's the name of it?
Yes, as well as local parishes nearby, St. John the Baptist in Valatia and St. Joseph's in Stuyvesant Falls in Stockholm.
So that was the group you had down on that southern tier.
Yeah, in that Columbia County.
Columbia County. Now we're here in Corpus Christi Church, and I could not be more honored to be joined by you today, Father.
Well, I'm honored too. I really appreciate this opportunity, and I'm so glad you thought of me. I had to admit, when you said it's been a long time, I thought you were starting the confession.
I mean, there's a few things I could confess, not gonna lie, but
probably after the YouTubes. Probably not for YouTube.
We'll take that into the back room. I will empty my cup back there. Okay. But it's great to see you again. I'm surprised you didn't break the shades out today. You know, get a little divine swagger going here.
Well, these are the same glasses. We're just indoors. It's a funny story you say that. At the beginning of the pandemic, I said a couple of liturgies outside, in fact in the cemetery, because we had an altar, and I thought it would be a wonderful way to kind of open things up, especially for Easter morning. But the problem was that these are transition lenses that get dark in the sunlight. And so I did not realize until we were all done with the recording that it looked like I had these shades on. And I actually got complaints from people thinking that I had done something on purpose and it wasn't very reverent. So but it was purely, it just happened naturally. But I have to tell you, I struggled the next time I said a liturgy outside to try to do things with my glasses off. And that was pretty good, except I wasn't reading very well.
Look, Father, haters are gonna hate. Don't hate, appreciate. And I thought you exemplified some swagger up there on that stage. And especially doing it outside too, like you don't see that very often. And during that time, like that was, correct me if I'm wrong, that was during the pandemic when people were adjusting and finding different ways to do everything. And those video recorded masses, those virtual masses were becoming more popular than ever because you couldn't physically go to mass. So I remember watching that with my grandparents down in Florida, and you were outside, you had the trees behind you. It looked very cold, I must say.
And windy.
Very cold, very windy. It was a very New York mass. But I like it because it gave it a good level of camaraderie.
It was a great opportunity to stay connected, with a nice percentage of the parishioners, and to get reacquainted with people from former parishes like you, that they were able to kind of see me again. So I appreciated that. It was very humbling. Yeah,
because you're down in Columbia County at the time, and I kept saying to my mother, I'm like, I want to see Father George. I want to see Father George. He's a Spiegeltown icon. I
don't know about that.
I want to go down.
I know some of the icons. I wouldn't put myself in the same category, but I appreciate the thought.
Spiegeltown has a very distinctive group of icons. You know that from your time there. But it definitely does. But it was cool because we'd always intended to go down to Columbia County to see a mass there, but we just never got to it. Then COVID came. We finally had the opportunity. It was cool to see you in action again.
Well, thank you very much. I appreciate that.
So one of my favorite mantras is that laughter is the best medicine, and you infuse laughter into everything that you do. I mean, you even laughed at yourself during your homilies, which I think is hilarious. So I always got a kick out of that when I was younger. So how has laughter shaped you as a priest and a person in general?
Well, I do take seriously the fact that we help with vocations and inspiring them, but also helping the people when we show us to be a people of joy. And of course, laughter and joy are tied together. I do have to admit, some of my laughter, especially when I laugh at something I myself said, is probably more out of nervousness. But I have to tell you, it's gotten me out of trouble, because at least even if people don't think I'm funny, they know I was trying to be, as opposed to being saying just something the wrong way. So I do think it's helpful, and I heard once that laughter helps you it takes away the distance sometimes between people.
Absolutely.
Yeah, it gives people a chance to respond. So I appreciate that.
It loosens you up. It definitely removes a layer of nervousness that could be hindering a meaningful conversation.
Yes,
so
yeah.
when you inject that laughter in there, it almost melts that ice.
Yeah, I hope it does.
And even if the joke didn't strike well with the audience, even if it wasn't received as funny, the laughter, the subsequent laughter after the joke loosens people up.
Yeah.
Like it gets people smiling. They engage a little bit more, and it just facilitates the homily a lot better.
What's interesting you say that about that, because I don't remember jokes, and I don't see myself as a joke maker, but I do try to find something humorous in the story to help make it memorable or to kind of highlight something so that you make a deeper connection.
Well, absolutely, and you've got, what is it, 10 minutes, you deliver a homily in 10 minutes, you want to keep people captivated, and humor engages people. You don't want to go up on the stage and ramble for 10 minutes because you're going to lose people.
Although I've done it.
You've done
but
it.
I know what you mean.
You've got a good way of balancing it, though, because there's distinction there. When you hear that, vintage, it wakes you up a little bit, and it energizes people, definitely.
Well, what's interesting is I sometimes use humor to kind of bridge subjects in the homily. And I know it's a common practice, especially among priests, maybe even deacons, to begin with a joke, and then get serious. But I find that sometimes it's better even to start serious, then lighten things up a little bit, and then bring it full circle. I think that when I'm at my best, I think I do that.
It's funny that you mention that because that's how I like to design my interviews. We've got the intro, which is a little bit lighthearted, and then we get some more serious questions, like some of the ones that'll follow this up. And then I'll throw a little lighthearted one in there. And then one that's a little bit more sentimental, a little bit more deep, and then end the interview with one that's more lighthearted. So it's all balanced, and you kind of need that contrast in there to keep people captivated. Because if you're all, if you're all jokester, or if you're all serious, you're gonna lose people's attention because it's all the same thing. But you and your homilies, you always mix it up. So it's that I feel from being a viewer of your homilies, it's that contrast that I heard this about Howard Stern interviews a couple of years ago on this show. You never knew what was coming next. And in your homilies, you never know what's coming next. And that's what keeps people glued in there.
Well, thank you.
Absolutely. And I can't wait to get back here for one of your masses here at Corpus Christi, because I want to see it. I love it. It's very entertaining.
Well, thank you.
So segueing off of our previous question, we dip into the homilies a little bit, but I want to go into even more depth here. How do you prepare for a homily? Do you engineer a script beforehand that you follow like verbatim throughout the homily, or do you improvise more? What's your strategy when it comes to a homily?
Well, that's the interesting thing. I've been a priest for 27 years now, more so actually, and that's changed the most over time. Because I used to start off, I had my books from the seminary, all these commentaries, big books, and I used to be at a word processor. We didn't even have personal computers back then. And I would do a lot more research and do outlines, not always printing it, but sometimes writing it and having it prepared. But as time went on, as things got busier, I found myself doing different ways of the homily, especially when I was traveling between parishes. Mm-hmm. I would be reflecting more on the readings and thinking as I drove, turning off the radio or the distractions, and kind of coming up with ideas about how I could relate a personal story or something, or a comment, or try to tie it in a little bit with what's happening, currently.
So you kind of let that silence stimulate your thought, and your thoughts, your reflection for the homily kind of just stems from there?
Yes, yeah.
It's really interesting you say that because when you're taking time, when you're preparing something, it's nice. You don't want to be distracted by other things. You want to just let those, whatever those ideas are going to be, just naturally flow into your head. And it's almost like when you're trying to create it yourself, or vehemently researching something, it doesn't come. But when you just let that silence come in and those ideas naturally surface in your head, that homily magically, and it's something like supernatural almost, that homily just surfaces in your mind.
Yes, and I think it's interesting because we use the same set of readings on a 3-year rotating basis, that I know I've given many homilies on the same scripture, but every 3 years something different hits me, or I might take the core of the message might be something that I shared in the past, but you dress it up differently because of based on what's going on.
And based on if people that you're preaching to have heard it before, you want to deliver it in different ways so that they don't recognize, because with parishes, you've seen probably with all 3 churches you've been in, you get a lot of the same parishioners that are there each and every single week. And a lot of those people, they remember your homilies, so you gotta, like you said, you gotta dress it up.
It's nice if they do. I think they remember some of the stories, but it's interesting. I apologized to a community once that I gave basically the same homily that I did 3 years earlier, and the response I got from a couple of people is, "Don't worry, Father, we don't even remember what you said last week." So I said, "Okay, I guess I'm safe."
I don't know if I'm supposed to take that positively or negatively,
I know.
But thank you.
Thank you.
So have you evolved your homilies throughout the years? Did you, like you said, you started off researching scriptures initially, and then you transitioned into generating your ideas naturally, like embracing silence and just seeing what comes into your head. Did you initially start preparing your homilies based on what was said in those scriptures and then adjust it to what people want to hear? Did you, throughout so many years, figure out what people want to get out of a homily and then cater your process towards that?
Well, sometimes I think people have common yearnings, and I think especially during the pandemic, people were looking for hope.
Yeah.
They were living in fear. Things got a little better, now they seem to be getting a little worse. There's also the tension between people seeing things different ways. So you try to say, well, how can we, without being confrontative or really too controversial, how can we talk about coming together and seeing things as a community as opposed to divided societies, to try to bring people together and focus it on, of course, from our perspective, our Lord Jesus Christ and the mission.
So it's situational, essentially.
I can give you an example. I recently gave a homily on the visitation where Mary goes in haste to be with Elizabeth. Mm-hmm. And I've talked about it in different ways, but recently I thought to myself, from Mary's point of view, maybe she wasn't going just to serve Elizabeth. I always saw it in terms of her being so selfless and giving of herself. And even when she could be preoccupied with her own concerns, she wants to be there and care for Elizabeth and her baby. But I also began to see Mary must have been very lonely after the angel left and must have really been grappling with, what does this mean for my future? She was probably yearning for companionship, to be with a kinswoman so that she could share this experience together. And see, that's a little different. Maybe it's my age, but that kind of thing kind of struck me, and my homilies kind of shifted in gears, not a woman of service, but a woman yearning for companionship with someone else. And that same companionship Elizabeth was yearning for, especially when literally her husband had gone mute after his questioning of the angel. And so the fact that these two women come together, and whether they were biological sisters or kinswomen or cousins or whatever, they became two sisters. And then I reflect on the image of soul sisters in our society today and what that means. So culturally, even though I'm a man, single, you can kind of like, you see a perspective from a woman's point of view almost. And I think, I'm embarrassed to say that because how could I have it from a woman's perspective? But I can speak about it in general enough terms that hopefully a woman could find a perspective within the shell of what I'm saying to fill it up with her own experience and her own reflection.
So, throughout the years of being a pastor, your perspective changes. And I can tell through your homilies, which you described there, that evolution of your perspective is reflected in your homilies. And that's almost the roots of how they evolve. You keep it fresh, you're recirculating, you're not saying the same thing every week. You know, like that perception of your story on Mary, you know, we all have stories like that we'll experience at one point in our life. Like I would view a story like that completely differently at age 17 than I would at age 19, then again at age 21, because your mind is constantly developing, your maturity increases every year, and your perspective evolves, especially when, like, you know, both of us are attentive to our relationship with God. You know, your perspective changes every year. So it was really cool to hear you unpack that, because it shows how you have grown your homilies and how they've changed based on how your perspective has evolved. That's pretty cool.
Oh, thank you. Yeah.
Now, I want to transition into something else here too, because you mentioned a couple minutes ago about not having enough time, as you did when you first started as a pastor, to prepare homilies, because you just have more responsibility. You know, as you climb up in the ranks, you've got more responsibility. You travel between different parishes. You know, when you were with us in Rensselaer County, you know, you had St. Bonaventure, then you had Holy Trinity up in Schaghticoke. You had to travel back and forth between those two on any given Sunday, as well as down in Greene County, you had Valatia and Kinderhook, right?
Yeah.
Or Chatham. Here now you're in one stationary location, but when you were with parishes that have multiple locations, how did you compartmentalize so you keep yourself fresh and present the best version of yourself every week?
Well, I'm not sure I did a great job of that, but I did attempt to do it. And I think what you're getting at is respecting each community for being unique. Although I think the very open secret is that church communities are more alike than they are different. Especially when they root themselves on church and Jesus Christ, they're obviously going to have the same mission, but they flesh it out differently because different churches have different personalities. And it may have happened over time. I'm sure in the past it had a lot to do with ethnic origins, but sometimes it just happens to be maybe former pastors that attracted people for a certain way or a certain style. So that maintains long after the pastor leaves. So there's a person, like I said, they're not different as much as they have separate personalities and unique characters to them. And I needed to be acknowledge that. Sometimes it's as simple as saying, this is your parish and our sister parishes, but naming them by name and kind of referring to the other parishes kind of in the background. There was when I was serving 4 churches, there were 5 communities with the Spanish-speaking community being unique. For instance, in Valatia and Chatham, I very much spoke about all the 3 parishes as sisters. Okay. Interestingly enough, when I was talking to people in Stuyvesant or Stuyvesant Falls that had unique personalities but were one parish, I spoke about them as being sisters, along with the Spanish community, because that was part of their community. And I kind of alluded to Chatham and Valatia as being their cousins.
That's fascinating.
Because it gave me a chance to show their closeness was unique, their individuality was intact, but they're still part of the same family. And I think to give that image of separate parishes being like an intimate, immediate family, but to notice that they're not just sister parishes, but just imagining them being sisters that, share different households, but they come together for great celebrations, and they're always there to support one another when they can.
And that's what's fascinating about the church, is that you serve in different communities, and they have their own identity, they have their own attributes. Like Spiegeltown is much different than Valatia, as Valatia is different from Stuyvesant Falls. Stuyvesant Falls is different from Scaghtcoke and Clifton Park, but they're all united because all of those communities follow the same thing.
Yeah.
They believe in the same ideals, but yet they're so unique themselves. It's fascinating.
It is, and I don't think all of it, it's not always, it's not always done intentionally. Sometimes it just happens naturally because you're responding to just the feel of the community and the responses, the emotions of things going on. I mean, you could be serving one community that experienced a death that touched the lives of many people, and then go to another community and they heard about the person passing away, but they're not intimately involved. So things change, the mood changes, the perspectives changes as you go from one place to another.
Yeah, and I'm sure that shapes your perspective as a person too, because while some communities could be enduring, like you said, a loss or a tragedy, I messed that up. You have to orchestrate your mass in a different way than you would a place that's feeling a little more vibrant, a little more upbeat. So
just to be sensitive.
Yeah.
Sensitive. For instance, if I said something humorous at one parish, but then realized that the next parish it may not be as appropriate just because they're in a tough spot.
Yeah, you have to customize what you're saying because of how it could land with the people you're talking about based on it. You gotta read the mood in the room, and I'm sure that's a skill you've equipped yourself with over the years.
I've tried. I can't always say I accomplish it, but it's certainly my goal to be sensitive to that.
It's tough because it's very intangible, but throughout years of experience, you start to be able to understand the temperature of the room and what should be said, what's better left unsaid. You start to improve with that throughout the years, and I'm sure just like I have, you'll learn through mistakes.
Oh, definitely.
Father, you got to forgive me here. I've had that Newport cough all day.
Oh, that's okay.
You hear it, I got the smoker laugh. I love it. Last week I got like bronchitis or something like that, and it's just lingering. I've got that Peter Griffin sexy voice going on right now too. So that adds a whole other dimension to this interview, but thank you for tolerating, the different inflections of my voice and laugh throughout the interview here.
No, I'm fine with that.
All right. So what I want to know here is, how did God guide you to becoming a priest? Like, did you know innately when you were younger that you're going to become one, or was there an experience later in your life that led you down that path? How did it all originate for you?
Oh, okay. Well, kind of an interesting segue from Family Guy references.
Yeah, that's how he rolls.
No, but I have to tell you, I was very fortunate that my parents were good friends with a family that were very close, almost like family to our pastor when I was growing up in Albany. And it gave us the opportunity, or gave me the opportunity, to see him as a grandfatherly figure and to feel comfortable with priests. My parents oftentimes socialized in the rectory, and I remember playing the basement, and it was just an interesting time where there wasn't that mystique, and getting to know the priests and seeing them as human beings, I think attracted me to the priesthood. When I was really young, I thought I'd be a priest. And then, I don't know, the urgency of that call seemed to dissipate through high school. I remember thinking about what it would be like to have a normal life, and I kind of put that behind me. And in college, I didn't think about it too much, but I did find myself most comfortable in church settings, and especially church organizations. There was a social justice house that I lived in that was rooted in the Catholic worker movement at its best, and reaching out to reaching out to people, as being a house that was concerned about social justice, but as well as pastoral care and reaching out to others. And so I found that inspiring of me, and I never really lost it, and it kind of was triggering in me. When I was at a crossroads in my life, a couple of years out of college, where I really wasn't sure what I was going to do, I joined a support group of sorts. It was kind of like young people gathering together to discuss what they wanted to do with their lives, and that nurtured my vocation. And then I got the tap on the shoulder by a couple of people that just said, I think you'd be good at this. And I was introduced socially to the vocations director, and that kind of drew me in all the more.
Now, where did you go to college, and what did you go there for?
I went to Le Moyne College, and I started off as a business major, but I found that I wasn't doing that well in my business courses, but I was excelling in English, so I decided to become an English major. But I realized the courses I was taking as a business major in English were a lot different than when I was in an English courses with the English majors. But so I wasn't sure where I would go with that. I was interested in communications, and I was interested in literature, but I wasn't sure what I was going to do. What can you do with an English degree? That's kind of a slogan, and almost a catchphrase, and it's a song title on it. But it's interesting because it rooted me in the understanding that I was opening my eyes and heart maybe to graduate school. And when that didn't seem to work out, I was trying to think what I wanted to do with my life. And interestingly enough, it did bring me back to school. It brought me to the seminary. So it gave me an opportunity. If people said, did you know you were going to be a priest? I remember thinking that I wasn't worthy to be a priest. Even though I felt they were human and that kind of edge wasn't there, I just didn't think I'd be holy enough. I didn't think I'd be talented enough. I didn't think I had the skill base to really live up to the priest that I most admired. But someone said, you're not going to the seminary to decide if you're going to be a priest tomorrow, or you're going to the seminary to discern if you're being called to the seminary at this time and place, and use that time for discernment and discovering who you are and discovering what you want to do. And it was a real privilege to do that. And the more I was in the seminary, the more I was drawn into it.
That's cool. It's not asking yourself if you're worthy, but seeing if you're being called. Like it's also a different way of viewing it. It takes somebody saying it to you like that to understand it almost.
Yeah.
And it's also another takeaway from what you said there. It's fascinating because you always hear about athletes. Like, for example, one is Patrick Mahomes, who grew up around sports. His father played professionally for the Mets, so he grew up around athletes, and they didn't have that mythological presence to them. To people like Zeke and I, who didn't grow up around professional athletics, you tend to put professional athletes on a pedestal and view them almost as mythological figures who almost aren't human. Whereas when you grow up around them, you build a comfortability with them. And I like the way you phrase it there. It takes the edge off. You can, for people like me who just came into the parish, when I'm like 6, 7, 8 years old, I can almost view a priest as a vehicle or a second coming, essentially, of Christ. Like it's a godlike figure up on the stage, kind of like Santa Claus.
Right.
But then you get later in life and understand, these people grew up like me. What's that saying? They put their pants on one leg at a time in the morning, like I do. They went through high school and college like me.
Well, what's interesting, I was blessed. I went to a grade school, St. Catherine's, with religious sisters, Sisters of Holy Names, and there were diverse and many of them. So you saw different personalities, and you knew that you could fit in differently. And the same thing, I went to CBA and the Christian Brothers. There were we had an abundance of vocations still at that time, where there were all the brothers and all the priests. I went to Lemoyne College, and I felt very close to the priests there, and they inspired me in so many different ways, especially to see the world differently. That I think part of the problem with vocations today is that because we have less, there's less of a pool of people to see ourselves within. You know, we don't find those one or two people that can inspire us to be the priests we're called to be.
So you almost always knew it was your call. Like you said,
I look back at it now, and I can't imagine doing anything else. And I look back at it now, and I realize it'll always be serviced.
You know, that's really admirable. You knew what you wanted to do. You pursued that, and here you are in your 27th year.
Although I will say that I went through many years of denial. but I think there's something inside me that felt called to it, and I really do believe that's a blessing and a grace that I received.
It's weird when you go back and reflect on something like that too, right? But being where you are now, you're established and being a priest, and you go back and reflect on the signs that guided you to where you are now, or what could have been different if you went down a different path. Like it's interesting when you go back and assess all those things, isn't it?
Yeah, very, very much so.
So saying goodbye is tough. You know, I did it for the first time this past summer when I relocated back down to Alabama for college. You know, I'd been living in the same house in Brunswick, New York for 21 years with both my parents. They're married. I'm an only child. You know, I'm very close with my grandparents, friends around here. And this year I decided to fly the coop and go to college down in UA. So I had to say some very tough goodbyes this summer. And it's uncomfortable. And you know it's what has to be done to grow and spread your wings, but it's tough to look yourself in the mirror and do that. Now, being a priest, priests relocate very frequently. You know, you've done a lot throughout your career with St. Bonaventure, with your church group in Columbia County. How do you approach saying goodbye?
With as much avoidance as possible. I have been so blessed. There's not a community, even as an associate. For the first 5 years I was an associate, first in Latham and then Schenectady. I have never, ever, ever wanted to move, which is a blessing.
Yeah.
Because I've loved every community I've been in. There have been times when I have to reflect and pray on it, and because I'm getting a little pressure to do it from different places, to know that it's probably time to move, but I'm never ready to move. It's funny, in '99, for the first time before I became pastor, a young man that was in college, and then I had been already close to him, and I'm still close to him. I celebrated his marriage, baptized his child. We're still close.
Yeah.
He's now in his 40s, but I'll never forget this. In '99, he called me up from school. He was at college. He was a freshman, to tell me that he wanted to share with me some words, because he knew how difficult it was going to leave. And he quoted what I said to him when he was going off to college. Kind of the same. I was thinking about that when you were talking about how difficult it was for you to move, even though it was a good thing to be away from your family. And I was so touched by it, that he remembered what I had said. And then he paused and he laughed and he said, "Sounds pretty stupid, doesn't it? That's how I felt when you told me the first time." And I thought, yeah, that's true. It's difficult. Most of my assignments have been about 7 or 8 years, and they've never been easy. And they've always been difficult. And it's interesting, this last time, I was spending a lot of time with videos saying goodbye to people. And I realized I was overwhelmed with emotion. At the same time, I realized that people from my new parish down Corpus Christi were kind of Googling me to find out what this new priest would be like. And they saw me on the screen with tears going down my eyes. And I thought, this is a horrible, horrible image for the new people to see. But it was so genuine because it was filled with emotion. I just love where I've been, and I've always felt content. There's not that there hasn't been problems or problems of my own making at times, but ultimately I just feel drawn to the people, and I love them, and it's hard to let go.
Well, you cultivate those almost like intimate relationships with people. It took about 7 to 8 years delivering masses to the same group of people. You start to get considerably close to them, and then that time comes where you're called to go somewhere else, relocate, and you have to detach. I mean, it can be pretty intimidating. I saw it this past summer after being somewhere for 21 years and seeing the same faces and seeing the same fixtures and going through the same routines every day. It's tough to accept that reality that this is it. But you also have to become vigilant of the fact that you can always return. You can always go back and see those people. I'll always see you come back down to, which I really admire, by the way. You always come down to that Spiegeltown firehouse breakfast we have sometimes on those Sundays in the fall and in the springtime too. And I'm sure you go back and visit Valatia. So you're never completely disconnected. And you also have to remember that you're going to another opportunity too. You're capturing another opportunity. Like Corpus Christi is an opportunity. Alabama is an opportunity. So you have to continue to remember that as well. But it's still, nothing can mask that feeling of I'm saying goodbye. When those relationships are really meaningful, like you say, that emotion is genuine. And I didn't, Zeke can probably attest to this too, I didn't cry outwardly that much back in August, but I have times where I'd go by myself at like midnight, my basement, go for a walk, something, and I would just bawl my eyes out. So, you process it in your own way, but it's a lot to take in, and no matter how many times you go through it, I don't think it ever becomes, routine. I mean,
it's always difficult.
Yeah.
And one of the most difficult parts of a priest being transferred is that in the cases that I'm aware of, it was arranged, it was determined, and I ended up agreeing to something, but it wasn't public for a couple of weeks beforehand. And it is so difficult to try to keep it all in. Because these are the people you love, these are the people you want to tell right away. It was interesting, just before I came to First St. Bonaventure, because Holy Trinity was separate at that time, and when I came here, I received the news just before Christmas. And I had to kind of bottle it in because I didn't want to take away Christmas from the people. And I don't mean that vainly, that they're that upset that I'm leaving, although I in my heart I know many are upset. But there's also the uncertainty as who the next person's going to be that is difficult too. So you know that you're putting people in a very awkward, painful situation, especially those that care for you. Well, and that's hard.
And you don't want to distract from Christmas either. I mean, it's a very meaningful time of year. Like it's almost like when coaches in college or the NFL, this happens a lot. They know that they're relocating. They know where they're going. Like Lincoln Riley a couple weeks ago, who was Oklahoma's head coach, probably knew he was going to USC at the end of the year. But Oklahoma was still in contention for the Big 12 title. You're not going to spill the beans until they lost their second game of the year to Oklahoma State, and then the truth comes out and going to USC. So you don't want to distract that focus on you're chasing a championship, just like you've got Christmas season. That's your main focus, and that news could distract the focus of the entire parish or the entire team, if you will, from whatever that.
That's a great analogy.
Yeah. But the church often serves as a vehicle for change for people who want to. During your time with the church, what's the most memorable story of transformation in a parishioner that you've witnessed?
That's a fascinating question. And I have to tell you, it's complicated because oftentimes you meet people at certain periods of their life that could be a high point or a low point in their life. There could be a time, oftentimes younger people, and in particular, you get to know them better if there's a loss in their lives or they're struggling with something. So you really do admire how they mature and how they grow. It's tough to think of one particular example. And I'm not sure I want to use an example of a priest, a current priest, especially without asking his permission to give his name today. But I have to tell you, my first assignment, I was an associate. And there was a family that took me under their wing, and they were very close to a neighboring priest. In fact, the priest was godfather to the two young boys that were there. One was a teenager, and one was in junior high. And so I knew them as a family just growing up, but this one particular, the younger brother, struggled a lot in high school and was struggling with a lot of issues in his life. And I know that it was a point of concern for his parents, but also his godfather, the priest, that I was friendly with. You know, we were pretty good friends, especially when we were close in geographically location. Sometimes I felt I drifted from him, but I always felt I could go back home to him. But he inspired me. He was like a mentor too, because I admired him. He had a really strong personality, and he was extremely funny. And he saw life with a little cynicism, but also with a big heart. And he cared for people. You know, he really cared for his people, and he really struggled when hard decisions had to be made and people were hurt. I really admired his compassion. But on the other hand, he had a defense mechanism that could turn it around, and he could, you know, say something very cynical and funny about it. So he had a balancing act that I admired. He was entertaining as well as he was inspiring. Well, his godson ended up contacting me out of the blue one day because he was thinking of the priesthood. And now he's a priest, and he's an awesome priest. And I see him really matured into a role and a personality that I think mirrors his godfather and mentor in many ways, but it's uniquely his own. But to see that grow, and some of it wasn't constant because the family was in and out of my life because of circumstances, mostly of moving around in different directions. But to just admire him as a priest and see him almost as a mentor, like his godfather, who was a true mentor, was for me, is a real honor. And there were times in my life when I was helping him through transitions because the godfather priest ended up ill and actually died before his priesthood. So that was a tough thing, but it was a beautiful thing to see this man come into his own and serve the people with that same kind of love, but still have incredible wit and wisdom on the side.
So it's kind of like a mirror image almost, because that godfather mentored you, and then he came to you for guidance and eventually became a priest. So
well, I wouldn't say that I had that same role, but I think I helped it. I supported it. And that was an honor, too, to be on someone's path journey, spiritual path,
Especially when somebody who was close to him helped you out.
Yeah.
Help you find your sense of direction when you're young. And then you have, and not the same, but a similar impact on him.
Well, that's not for me to say, but I think he would be. I think he would be very. He's very appreciative that I've supported him and vice versa.
Yeah. So it's when you sit back and look at that, I mean, it's something that's really meaningful that you experience in your life. You can't take that away. It's a pretty cool story that you're able to witness there.
Yeah. And when you first brought that up, I said, how could I pick one person? There's a lot of women and men that I've seen so much growth. And sometimes it's out of tragedy to see them overcome it too. It's not just they had stellar lives, but they've really just coped and they've cared for people and they haven't given up. There's a lot of people like that. It's too numerous to mention, but I'm glad I have that one example.
Yeah, that's amazing. It really is.
Thank you.
So it's Christmas Eve Mass. The parking lot is filling up. People are flowing into the chapel. The seating's filling up. Cameras are flashing. Got a pageant. How do you process it all? How do you center yourself and mentally prepare yourself for that Mass? Because I'd imagine, especially, first beginning as a priest, it's got to be pretty nerve-wracking.
Oh, it is. And it's an interesting question now because last year it was so different than the year before. And this year we're just not quite sure what it's going to be until it becomes. It's we're nervous about the numbers that we're hearing about, and we're hoping that we just can fill up and keep distant. But I think it's going to be very emotional because we didn't have it last year.
Yeah.
That was particularly true at Easter, because having the churches closed at Easter, they were open somewhat at Christmas time, but it's going to be interesting, to have that. I'm looking forward to it, but I do feel that anxiety and the distress.
Well, because there's uncertainty. I mean, you don't know what's coming next when you're seeing this game after this event getting canceled and postponed, and Christmas is only X amount of days away, so you don't really know what's coming next. But at the same time, it's going to look a lot different than it did last year, pretty much almost regardless, because everything was so distant last year. So it'll be improved from what it was before. But I didn't even think about that extra layer, because I was just going based on what I witnessed as a child. Every year, Christmas Eve Mass is always a big shebang. I mean, you've got people out in the vestibule who can't get in. You gotta get to Mass 45 minutes early to get your seat, your usual seats taken. The camera's flashing. Like, it's very full of life. And now you add the pandemic onto it, which I totally forgot about. It adds a whole other dimension this year.
It was funny. Many years ago, I received a call in the rectory in between Masses on Christmas Eve, and someone told me that they were never coming to church again because someone stole their seat that they always sat in. And so I felt really bad about it, but I remember hanging up thinking, well, I guess we won't have this problem next year. I guess the seat's going to be open.
So that's...
Yeah.
Oh God, forgive me. That's one more person that's gonna have a seat next year. I have to fret about. That's funny.
I hope they don't mind me mentioning this, but I had the opportunity and the privilege of celebrating a Christmas liturgy at LaSalle today, and it was interesting because it was in the chapel for about a dozen students, including a parishioner from here and a parishioner from Transfiguration, which was cool. And so it represented some of my background. But we celebrated it, and then the 12 were all Eucharistic ministers, so they actually went forth into the hallways, and because everything was being live streamed in the classrooms. And so the student body, the faculty and staff would come out to us in the hallways. So it was really a sense of going out, going forth, and then returning back, and bringing the Eucharist to the people and then coming back. It was a beautiful, beautiful expression.
So what does Christmas mean to you?
Christmas means new hope and new beginnings. It's an opportunity to reconnect with my faith on a personal level. It brings back the memories of Christmas of youth and different stages of my life, but it means so much emotionally, because it all comes together. And like I said, there's the wonder of the child's reaction and all of that. And so there's an emotional pull at Christmas time to make you realize what's really, truly important in the world and to appreciate everything. But then there's also the spiritual dimension that you recognize the fact is that we're not separated from God, that God is truly Emmanuel, God is with us, we're not alone. There's that beautiful image that God comes into the world and holds us by letting us hold God, like a baby in our arms, to nurture and cradle our faith in a profound and special way. But to know that God is not far off or distant or judgmental or cruel or apart from us, but God is among us, and God is with us. And it's a beautiful thing to save us, yes, but more importantly, just to be with us and give us life.
And that's almost like we're one with him.
Yep.
On that day, or that series of days, the 24th, the 25th. So you've got that spiritual message when it comes to Christmas. There's that spiritual meaning behind it. And you can also couple that with that. I feel like there's more of a lineage to Christmas than any other holiday. Easter, I feel like you have resurrection.
Yeah.
Like Easter to me feels like a comeback story. Like Easter is almost inspiring to me in a way. And then Thanksgiving is a day of gratitude. Whereas Christmas, I feel like is almost noted by lineage and tradition. Christmases of years past, you look at how the day has evolved. How is it celebrated when I was younger? How am I celebrating it now? Who is around me? I mean, it's almost like those traditions are so strong that it connects all of these years and kind of the story of your life together.
That's very profound because Scripture, especially Matthew, roots it in the generations of past, in our Jewish heritage and the people of Israel. And it's all about, from a theological point of view, rooted in history and our history, but on a symbolic level, an emotional and spiritual level, we do it in our own lives. Like we remember the Christmases we shared with our grandparents. And when they were with us, they remembered the Christmases they shared with their grandparents. And it's just a beautiful time of just feeding off that history of who we are and what we're about. And for those of us that are so blessed that we were rooted in a faith that connected us with church and with an understanding of God's love, God's acceptance, and God's forgiveness, it's so much more powerful because it brings out the best in who we are as family.
It does. It truly does. I feel like in that 24 hours, Christmas Eve, Christmas Day, you truly do see the best in everybody, and everybody's just around each other and vibing and having a good time. And Christmas, in a way, is almost timeless, because while we may change and the world may change, I feel like Christmas is constant. It's even the music is constant. I mean, every year, it's not like we have a new Christmas hit coming out. It's still Jingle Bell Rock and Have a Holly Jolly Christmas.
Well, not necessarily in church.
Well, I mean, church, you got the Hark the Herald Angels sing and the Joy to the World. Christmas is almost timeless. The world changes, but Christmas stays.
And people yearn to hear the Christmas music of the past.
Now, of course, you have Last Christmas, which is my favorite song, come along. You'll get some bangers along the way, but mostly Christmas is itself. It's authentic, timeless, stays the same while we change. It's a pretty cool phenomenon. It really is. Yeah. Well, Father, thank you for joining me today. I appreciate it. That was an excellent interview, and we missed the Myrtle Beach Bowl for this, so you must be a pretty special guy.
Oh, well, thank you. I appreciate that. How old were you when I first met you? I first came to St. Bonaventure's, then Transfiguration.
I want to say 6.
Wow, so that's amazing. I really appreciate that all you've done and been through, and your skills. It's an honor. It's really amazing. I remember your first communion, so it's a real pleasure for you to take part in this, and it really was a gift to me to kind of reflect a little bit on my priesthood, but also all our common vocations. All of us have a story, and all of us have that connectedness, and it's really beautiful. And thank you for all indulging mine.
and it was intriguing to hear your story today, because I've seen you do Mass before. I'd see you every week at Transfiguration, but I never knew your story. And when you were at Transfiguration, I was too young to understand the art of all. I was 12, 13 years old. You have like a very narrow view of life at that time. But that now that I'm 21, you know, I always go back, reflect on your time at Transfiguration, because it was great. I was
Well,
like,
that's very thoughtful.
yeah, you know, I always reflect that, like, yeah, times back at St. Bonaventure with Father George, like, those were the golden days.
Speaking as a 21-year-old, I hope that later in life you have some pretty good years to match it, if not exceed it.
Well, I certainly hope so as well. But it's something, because I always watched you in Mass, but back then I never thought, you know, what's Father George's story? So I'm really grateful that I was able to get the introspective on that today. I thank you for agreeing to do this.
And I affirm you doing these YouTube conversations, and I'm honored to be part of them. I know you've done a lot more with business leaders and other segments of the community, and for you to really want to bring in someone representing a church or religious life, I really appreciate that. I think that's really very inspiring.
Yeah, I like hearing different perspectives, different people's stories, and that's what the series is all about. So thank you for joining us, Father.
Thank you.
And thank you all for watching.
Thank you.
Merry Christmas, Happy New Year. Have a great day.
God bless you.